So recently I opened a dialogue on Twitter with many notable players in the community, from pros to coaches, chiming in about who is the most broken agent of all time in their strongest state. So we're gonna break down and talk about all the most overpowered agents that have ever existed in Valorant, and which one would reign supreme if you stacked them head to head. Let's get right in. But if you want to be absolutely broken and dominate and climb, we have in-depth VOD reviews that are breaking down both pro and low-ranked players, showing you exactly what you should do and not do in your games so that you can climb with ease and become a much better player, including mechanical guides, agent courses, and more. So what are you waiting for? Do yourself a favor and climb right now down below. Now, when I'm talking about the most broken agents of all time in their strongest state, I'm talking about agents that were incredibly powerful at some point and even meta defining, but Rito went in and nerfed them in some way, and they are just a lot weaker than they used to be, and we're stacking them up against each other because there have been a lot of really overpowered agents. So there's actually 7 on this list that I could consider to be completely busted characters in some way, and we're gonna talk about the levels here, and we're gonna talk about ultimately what is the most broken agent of all time. Now, first off on the list, we have Astra on release, and this character quickly became one of the most broken characters we have seen in ranked play. She saw almost a ubiquitous pick rate on every single map in pro play, and even though she's very difficult to utilize when you're in ranked, she still saw tons of ranked play as well. Astra was incredibly powerful at stalling out points, capable of placing like a million freaking stars, stalling the point out, got to use tons of different abilities, could ultimate and ability combo, and you combine all that together with the fact that she could just do her job on controller. She just did way too much for way too little, and she basically dictated the entire meta around her until Rito came in and just nerfed her across the freaking board. Every single ability got hit in one way or another. But let's move on to the next character that we have on the list, which is Killjoy on release. Now, Killjoy was very, very strong. Remember, Killjoy used to be able to be anywhere, and a utility could still work. And on top of that, the utility was actually more lethal than it is now. And on top of that, the nanoswarms actually were able to tuck into a lot of really crazy spots that actually got patched out. And remember also, Killjoy's turret used to actually tag and slow enemies, and they reduced that by over half, which made it so the Killjoy turret is a lot easier to deal with, when before it was a nightmare to push into a Killjoy turret where it just freaking slowed you to oblivion. All in all, Killjoy got hit a number of different ways, and especially with the power creep of the game, she fell out of favor after nerf after nerf after nerf. Next off, we have Cypher, a character that is in desperate need of buffs right now. Cypher used to be dominant back in beta. Now, it's important to understand that back in the day, there wasn't a lot of competition, right? But Cypher was also incredibly powerful. First off, his cages had the ability to slow enemies. If they walked through it, they got freaking slowed. So not only were they disincentivized to push through it because it made noise, but they got slowed, so it's basically like you could never push through. And on top of that, you got cam up every 15 seconds. Cypher was a freaking monster at locking down sites and basically played on almost every map at the time. Now, keep in mind, maps that don't favor Cypher as much, the more open maps, weren't out yet. And 2, there weren't as many Sentinel competitions as there were back then. But you take that Cypher and you throw him in the game now, and I think he would make a resounding impact with how powerful he was. Next up, we do gotta talk about Chamber. Chamber on release. He's nuts. I mean, he quickly rose to one of the highest picked characters, period. Over 80%, some of the most dominant performances we have ever seen on a character. And unlike Astra, who primarily affected pro play, Chamber was like pro and ranked play alike. He was like an amazing pub stomper. He was amazing as a climbing solo queue agent, and he was amazing in pro play. There was just a ton about Chamber that's so powerful, and it's actually unclear whether or not these nerfs did enough to take him off this high horse. That's how powerful Chamber is. He is ridiculous. He's a character that we've never seen before, and he's like an obvious figurehead of power creep because you get Chamber on release and he is so freaking powerful where he can compete against some of the most broken versions of all these other characters. Next up, we got to talk about Raze paint shells, and in a poll that I did where I actually compared Raze to Sage to Astra to Killjoy, Raze actually won because not only were her blast packs better overall, but she had 2 freaking paint shells on release, and it got so bad where you had, you know, streamers like Summit1G complaining about it, and the Raze paint shells that was just so freaking annoying, where you could get paint shelled like into oblivion. On top of that, her ultimate was very, very easy to use back then. And if I remember correctly, it was actually only 6 ultimate points instead of 7, is what I remember. Maybe I'm actually completely wrong about that, but regardless, Raze was actually just nuts. A crazy freaking powerful character. And the thing is, the Razes as a whole have gotten better, right? With movement, they know the text on the character, and, you know, an Immortal, a Radiant, a pro Raze player is so much better than Razes were in the past. But back then, Razes could get tons of value for basically free. So you gotta think about what it would be like if a Raze now could use what they could back then, and they would just get a crazy amount of value. I mean, double freaking paint shells would be a nightmare in today's current day and age. Like, imagine getting paint shelled on 2 sides of Gen, or just like double paint shell tree, or just, I don't even know. I mean, I could just think of a million different things that would be crazy annoying. Not to mention the paint shells combo with Fade's ability. Like, I don't know. This character would be completely nuts and busted. But moving on to the next character, perhaps the most dominant character of her time, and it was Sage. Now, Sage was ridiculously powerful. She could heal herself for more, she could heal herself for faster. On top of that, her wall would go to full health instantly. It was cheaper, so she could actually buy it and like a ghost pistol, for instance. And you combine all that with the fact that her slow orb actually had a much larger radius. This character was basically like 100% pick rate back in beta. It was just insane. Not only that, but for a long time, she was the only healer in the game. And with healing abilities so strong, it was a very sought after ability. And this character saw almost a guaranteed pick rate on, you know, both teams in ranked. And in pro play, she saw almost 100% pick rate as well. It was freaking crazy. And I think another part of the reason why Sage was picked so much, and some players would even dodge games completely if there wasn't a Sage in it, is because players didn't properly know how to take space. Like, let's go to Bind, for instance. Instead of taking showers control, smoking across, trying to take control of the site before you plant, a lot of players were just forcing it through with a Sage wall and a plant, and they thought that that was the only way to do things. Now we know better, but back then it was like, we can't possibly win on Bind if we don't have a Sage. And even high ranked players thought this at the time. So the fact that Sage was just this character that was so powerful was actually warping the development of players. That's crazy to think about, but it really was warping the development and the improvement of the community as a whole. Kind of crazy to think about. Now, the last character is one that is interesting. You might not be thinking about her like this, but it's true in some regard, and it's pre-nerf Jet, where Jet could actually dash on a whim. And you gotta understand that this changed Jet in a lot of ways. Sure, in some ways, Jet is better, right? If she can utilize her dash in, and then she can get multiple kills, she can get her dash back, or if she pre-primes the dash, gets a kill, it counts towards the next dash. But the reality of the situation is, if anyone has been a Jet main, or you've played Jet before the changes, you would take old Jet over new Jet every single time, because the things that you could get away with were crazy. You could take a very, very aggressive angle and not get punished for it. You could op, and you could op multiple different angles. You didn't have to pre-prime anything. You didn't have to predict anything. This was a time where Jet could be a very reactionary character. You didn't really have to anticipate. You didn't really have to go above and beyond to try to set up the perfect situation to use her. You could literally just go take any engagement anywhere and have a huge advantage over your enemy, and never get caught off guard, and get kills and get out without getting traded, even up against multiple people. It was just crazy and ridiculous. The character was nuts, and for the longest time, the community thought she wasn't very good, actually. And it just became apparent, the more and more people played with her, that she was not only just busted on attack, on eco, with opping, she was just one of the most powerful characters we've ever seen. Now, that being said, there were characters that were introduced that would actually eat up how powerful she was, like Chamber, for instance. If you compare her in the head-to-head, Chamber is still probably the better opper, even when we talk about pre-nerf Jet. But if you take a look at how good pre-nerf Jet was and what she could do in the past meta, and you compare her to some of the top duelists in the game right now, Jet looks freaking nuts, actually just insane. So how would we actually decide who is the most broken agent of all time if we put them all, you know, together in the game right now, competing against each other? What is the most broken a character is, period? And I think that I would probably bring it down and you know, decrease it to 3 major choices, honestly. And I would decrease it to 1, Astra. I think Astra was just meta warping, especially if we're talking about pro play and esports. Astra was crazy. And even Astra now, if you put her in the game in her previous state now, she would just dominate the meta just like that. She would be completely nuts. The next thing I would probably say is Chamber on release. Chamber on release had some of the highest pick rate in ranked and pro play, and it was not even close. It was actually just ridiculous. And, you know, I do think that Chamber on release was one of the most powerful characters we've seen. And I think that he's still very, very, very freaking strong, even after all those nerfs. And then the last thing, I have to give this on a technicality, but Sage, I don't necessarily think that Sage is that broken if you brought her compared to some of these other characters now. But if we look at her pick rate back in the day, in the time that she was created, she is just freaking nuts. Now, from a power level point of view, compared to some of the other options, maybe not so much. I do want to give honorable mentions to like Raze and Cypher, and even Killjoy and Jet. All these characters are just nasty. But Sage, there has never been as dominant of a pick rate as Sage. Only Chamber has come close. And this is for both ranked and casual play. Sage was dominant. And that is one of the reasons why she's in my top 3. But all in all, from a top-down perspective, like a pro perspective and a meta-defining perspective, I have to give it to Astra as the most broken agent of all time. She was just crazy strong. I mean, just ridiculously strong. You know, you throw ranked in there, it's probably Chamber. But you tell me, who do you think is the most broken agent of all time? What would you give it to out of this list? All of them are nuts. And if you could bring one of them back to full power and only you could play it, which one would you pick? Which one would you pick? Let me know down below. But make sure you check out the GameLeap website for all the tips, tricks, and guides and everything you need to become absolutely cracked on Immortal or Radiant level player on any of these agents and more. Do yourself a favor and go check it out right now using the links down below.